Welcome to the show, Manish. I'm going to start with something that's very much the subject of the day. People say that the election results were influenced by unemployment and that we don't acknowledge the high level of unemployment in our country, particularly youth unemployment. I'm sure there's something to that, but I've always been intrigued by something else you said. You said by focusing on unemployment, we neglect poverty, and poverty is the real problem. Am I caricaturing what you said, or is it roughly accurate?
No, that's absolutely accurate. Unemployment in India has stayed between 4 and 9% since 1947. That's not a fudge.
Yeah.
Because of employed poverty. So people have jobs, but they don't have enough money from those jobs to make a living or to make a life. So poverty is, if the problem with prescribing or diagnosing the problem as unemployment is, you'll do three things. You'll throw money from helicopters, you'll mandate a 3-day work week because there's a shortage of work, and you don't care about productivity, so you'll make people dig with spoons rather than JCBs. Or shovels, right? Because
you can hire more people that
because
way.
Bhuka Nanga Pyasa hai, so this patient is in the ICU, right? But if the patient is in the ICU for 30, 40 years, somebody's got to tell them to lose weight or quit smoking or exercise, right? And so my case always has been that India's problem is not jobs, it's wages. And it's wages for 3 reasons. Because there's no such thing as poor people, there are people in poor places. And when I say places...
you're going to have to expand on that.
Yeah, when I say places, I mean 2 physical places, which is which state you live in India, which city you live in India. But there are 3 conceptual places, which is which sector do you work in India, which firm do you work in India, and which skill do you have. So let me break that down. If you say which state, my parents live in UP, I live in Karnataka, both states have the same GDP. Karnataka does it with 1/5 the number of people.
Right.
So people in Karnataka are 5 times more productive. If you think about cities, if everybody in India, we are in Bangalore right now, if everybody in India lived in Bangalore, India's GDP would be more than China. Right? India's GDP is $2,500. In fact, Bangalore's GDP is $12,000.
Okay.
So which city you live in has huge impact. Which sector you work in actually is so fundamental to what wages or income you get, because agriculture has 42% of the labor force, but it only has 8%, it has 15% of GDP. IT is 8% of GDP with only 0.8% of India's labor force. So if you work in IT, you get paid more. If you work in agriculture, you get paid less. It's not your fault. Which firm you work in, big formal, or let's not say big, let's say formal firms have a 24 times difference or better higher productivity than informal firms because they're able to invest in technology.
For the purposes of our viewers, by formal firms, you mean firms that are sort of well organized, pay taxes?
They pay Provident Fund and ESI. Let's use that as a proxy.
And informal firms are a guy hires you, pays you in cash, and you don't appear. That's
because they don't have the ability to invest in technology, they don't have the invest in training, they treat human beings as an expense rather than an asset.
And is that informal sector still a large part of our economy?
Well, India has 63 million enterprises. 12 million of them don't have an office. 12 million work from home. Only 12 million are registered for GST. Only 8 million pay GST. Only 1 million pay Social Security. But there are only 25,000 companies in India with a paid-up capital of more than 10 crores.
Only that many? That few?
So 6.3 crore enterprises translating to 25,000 companies with a paid-up capital of $1.5 million. It's really something we should be paying attention to, right? And that...
Well, at least we should be aware of. Most people are not even aware of that.
Yeah, so that's the regulatory cholesterol argument, which I'll come to. But firms are more productive, and which firm you work for really matters. And which skill you work for. I mean, we pay 4 times different salary to the kid the same age, the same qualification, and we have 4 lakh employees across the country. But which skill you have, and it's not necessarily the hard skills, it's the soft skills. So I would submit poverty is about which state you live in, which city you live in, which sector you work in, which firm you work for, and which skill you have.
Can I just, when you say poverty, you're not using the economist definition of poverty line, above, below. You're using poverty as a synonym for people who are not paid enough or paid too little.
I think so.
Yeah.
When I landed in the US in August 94 for my MBA, by September I was asking myself, these Americans are smarter than us. Why are they richer than us? Like, clearly I can kick their butt individually, these white people.
As you guys have proved in your sector.
Why does Ram Bharose, who works 24 hours a day, make 50,000 rupees a year? Why does Joe Sixpack, who drinks beer and watches college football, makes $50,000 a year? Because the pathology is not at the level of the individual. The problem is not with an electrician from Balasore in Odisha moves to Lucknow, gets 2 times more salary. That same electrician moves to Bangalore, gets 4 times more salary. Moves to Dubai, gets 8 times, and moves to Switzerland, gets 25 times.
And he's doing roughly the same job.
He's exactly the same person. So when people say, oh, you're putting lipstick on a pig, you have to skill people up. Sure, we always have to improve human capital. But the same electrician have a 24 times different salary based on where they're working. So poverty, in my mind, is obviously at its base level bhuka nanga pyasa, which, before I was born was probably the reality of India. But somewhere in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, we've done a reasonable job of eradicating bhuka nanga pyasa, even though I think a modern state is a welfare state. So there'll be some elements or some parts of India where bhuka nanga pyasa may exist, and you use the welfare state to fix them. But I think this poverty or jobs argument has got screwed by 3 people. One are the romantics who believe that companies are like governments and employment is a lifetime contract rather than a taxi cab relationship. It's been screwed by trade unionists who believe that job preservation is a form of job creation. It never is. And it has obviously in the last few years been destroyed by the populists.
By the populists? In what
way?
The
populists who believe that, welfarism can be a substitute for job creation.
So shall we make a distinction between, you said a modern state can be a welfare state. So there's welfarism to help people at the complete margins of our society at the lowest level. Because you want to take the lowest people and make their lot better. Welfarism, as we now use it, is to give people money for not doing very much, because we're going to argue that that takes the space of job creation and gives them things to do. There is a distinction between the two or not?
Absolutely, because, in my mind, populism or welfareists are not... The safety net can't become a hammock. It has to be a safety net.
That's a good phrase, actually. That's a great phrase.
You can't hang out. You can't hang out on it. I think they're also a little patronizing because all of us get more from work than income. We get identity, we get networks, we get self-esteem. So populism is, by definition, doesn't pass the smell test of sort of self-esteem. But most importantly, in the last few years, how you finance the welfare state is really important. If you finance it through debt, you're essentially being a bad ancestor. If you finance it through taxes, like Sweden, Norway, and Finland are second, third, and fourth, or third, fourth, and fifth in the world in percentage of GDP on government spending. But they are also 5, 6, and 7 on ease of doing business, which means that they finance their welfare state through taxes rather than through debt. In the last 5, 10 years, the state governments have been so fiscally irresponsible. It's sort of that mentality of, I'm not going to be around to bear the consequences of this, right? See, in the banking crisis, I remember, I've been on the central bank board and involved in banks. I remember a particularly painful email conversation they showed us where this banker was selling a bad derivative to an Indian corporate of 500 crores, and the risk management guy says, why are you doing this? In 3 years, the client will lose money, and in 5 years, the bank will lose money. The banker replies, IBG, YBG. So the risk management guy says, what do you mean? He says, I'll be gone, you'll be gone. Right? So that's a fundamental view in the last 5, 10 years of politicians consciously making promises at state government levels where they will not be around to pay the bill. And I think that distinction between welfarism, which is debt financed, welfarism, which is tax financed, and populism, which is debt financed, is now fundamentally been recognized in the last round of state elections. If you see what's happened in Odisha or Andhra or Punjab or maybe in a few other places, is that welfarism is being called out by voters as, first of all, commoditized, because DBT, direct benefit transfer, commoditizes that.
Yeah.
And second of all, they're recognizing that maybe this is, I don't want to leave my kids, with the debt that this entails.
You think it's still an election issue? Because people go into elections and make all kinds of extravagant promises. Nobody even asks them how they're going to finance these promises. And the answer, of course, is debt, which will be carried on through the generations. But do voters realize this? Are they voting against it?
Voting is not an algorithm, it's a heuristic, right? We don't.
You need to explain that.
Well, it's not a computer program, right?
Right.
We don't input data on our politicians, their promises, make an Excel spreadsheet on their tax projections and this. That's not how people vote.
Right.
Heuristics are broad sort of biopsies which we do in our head on, can I trust this person? Is this person competent? In the past, I think in India, because of our abject poverty, and India was a reckless political experiment which worked out. Yeah. But the 1955 Avadi resolution, in the first 30 years of India, the absolute number of people in poverty doubled.
Yeah.
So I think that the reckless economic experiment, there was a time when you could get away with sloganeering of Garibi Hatao or stuff like that while you were actually doing nothing about it. So I think voters are starting to get to the next orbit. It may be the hierarchy of needs, it may be the way we think. It also, I think, has been driven by aspirations.
Yeah.
I think for our parents or for our grandparents, self-employment was usually self-exploitation.
Yeah.
Right? They were self-exploiting because they had lowered their expectations, and they said, as long as body, mind, soul stays together, we're fighting, we're just independent. I think kids now have higher expectations from work. They have higher expectations from relationships, but they also have higher expectations from government. So I was a little bit worried about politicians getting away with IBG, YBG in the state government level.
And that was across parties, right?
Yes. Well, it was across parties, but it was more pronounced in the last 10, 15 years at the state government levels than the central government.
But all parties are state governments.
Pretty much. I think
free water, free electricity.
Yes. I think that populism has thankfully may have run its course. It may have got commoditized. What is delightful about these election results is even people who believed that would work are now rethinking their strategy for the next 5 years.
Okay. Let me give you a sort of counter argument. When the UPA came to power in 2004, one of the discussions between Sonia Gandhi and Manmohan Singh was about liberalization. And Manmohan Singh said liberalization had transformed India. And I don't think you can disagree with that. And the answer was to go ahead with more liberalization. And she said yes. But everywhere I go, when I travel for election campaigns, people are poor. Liberalization has not reached people at the bottom of society. You have to have welfare to reach them. And I think there are many disagreements initially, but ultimately there was a consensus with Narega and stuff like that. Do you think that was a valid argument?
I think that India's transformation is obviously not happened because we have 42% of our labor force working in agriculture.
Yeah.
India's transformation has not happened because we only have 52 cities with more than 1 million people.
Right.
China has 375 cities. Yeah. We have 6 lakh villages. 2 lakh of our villages have less than 200 people. So we didn't transform in terms of industrialization. We didn't transform in terms of urbanization. We didn't transform in terms of formalization. The 63 million enterprises only transferring to 25,000 companies is a child of informality. And informality is the slavery of the 21st century. So, what is informality? It's a sense of humor about the rule of law. So we didn't formalize India. We didn't financialize India. Credit to GDP was stuck at 50% for the 20 years. And we didn't really focus on human capital outside the elite level. We got the
human
IITs
capital should have been one of our greatest resources.
Yeah, primary education was a blind spot in the 1948 Radhakrishnan report, the 1968 Kothari Committee report, the 1968 National Education Policy. So I think that if you believe that welfarism can substitute for formalization, urbanization, industrialization, financialization, and human capital, you've got to be delusional, or you've got to be playing a one innings game.
Yeah.
If you're playing a one innings game, I understand.
It'll work in the short run.
It would work in for 5-year time frame, but also at what price would it work, right? I mean, I think Jonas Salks, the inventor of the polio vaccine, said our biggest responsibility is to be good ancestors. It's not to steal from our grandchildren, clearly. So I think that I have no problem with the welfare state, and in fact, I welcome a welfare state because the private sector can't solve primary education or primary health care, or do law and order or do defense. But my sense is, buying Air India for 2.5 crores in 1955 and then putting in 1.8 lakh crores in the last 10 years of ownership, while for somebody like me, the budget of the Ministry of Skills is 8,000 crores.
Yeah.
Why did you put 5 lakh crores into nationalized banks? You put 1.5 lakh crores into Air India and another 3-4 lakh crores into other PSUs, while the budget of the Ministry of Central Education budget is 75,000 crores. So I think that the notion that welfarism is a sin is probably outdated. We're not asking for Margaret Thatcher or Ronald Reagan kind of rightism. But the private sector has a trust deficit, the government has an execution deficit, and non-profits have a scale deficit.
Yeah.
And I think that welfarism is at the intersection of a partnership between all three, but so is job creation. I think that the notion that, I think in fact one of the reasons that India is poor, we don't have to be, is the lack of teamwork between the private sector, between government and non-profits to recognize we all have our own swim lanes, we all have our birth defects. But India is really going to only be powerful if we all work together. And, I understand the Jai Jaikar of 1991, but, India and China had the same GDP in 1991 per capita.
Yeah.
So we may have got to third in total GDP, or we will soon, we're fifth, but we're 138th in per capita GDP.
But do you accept the argument Indian politicians and economists offer all the time that, yes, of course, we could have done as well as China, but we'd have had to sacrifice democracy?
I don't think so. I think that the success of China probably has 20% related to their dictatorial or their autocratic or their communist tendencies. The other part of it is just non-farm job creation.
Yeah.
I mean, we could have attracted the same foreign direct investment if we had lowered our regulatory cholesterol, built the infrastructure, and fixed our human capital. I mean, in fact, most foreign investors in China held their nose with communism.
Yes.
It wasn't like they were attracted by it. And, when we deserve capital, see, 50% of India's foreign direct investment since 1947 has come in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
Now, that is because of the compounding of human capital, it's because of the compounding of infrastructure being built, it's the compounding of lower regulatory cholesterol. But it is also a bunch of luck that we have right now. China, it's a China luck. I mean, I hope Xi Jinping doesn't get a 4th term. I hope he gets a lifetime. I mean, Xi Jinping is great for India. Yeah. I think COVID was great for a digitization super cycle. I think the servicization is a powerful gift for a country where more people speak English than America, right? More people speak English in India than America. So I think that whatever may have happened in the past, it's obviously postmortems have a certainty that prescriptions don't, and historians tell you to be careful. So whatever happened, but I do think the Avadi resolution of 1955 was a toxic sort of...
You'll have to tell us what the 55 resolution...
It was the social adoption of socialism and the kneecapping of the private sector, the putting commanding heights of the public sector, nationalizing banks. All the chaos that was created for the private sector comes from the 1955 Avadi resolution. It was embedded in the 1956 second 5-year plan. So I think that was a toxic piece of regulation. I do think that I wish we had included formalization and education in 1991 reforms. I think
Yeah.
everybody would tell you that human capital
Is the
and
key.
private sector regular growth is key. And we have 60,000 compliances, we have 6,000 filings, we have 26,000 ways to.
Yeah.
We've now documented that. And people say, well, no CEO is in jail. But that doesn't matter. If no CEO is in jail, then why do you have 26,000 ways to put people in jail? In fact, my favorite line in the Vishnu Sahasranam roughly translates to, why did God create fear? So he could take it away. So if you have 26,000 ways, it's only encouraging corruption. So if we agree that let's have 10 ways to put CEOs in jail.
And that should be enough, right?
Oh, and put them in jail. If you steal the Provident Fund, put them in jail. If they don't have security or safety in a factory, put them in jail if people die for the negligence, But put them in jail for not putting katha chuna in a factory every 6 months, to put them in jail for not having apprentices. I think that's just corruption, and nobody you're putting in jail, right?
But there's also a public sense when CEOs or businessmen are raided or jailed saying, oh, there must be crooks. Nobody actually looks at the big picture.
Well, if you look at the license Raj, you could not be an honest businessman and be successful in the license Raj.
Yeah, but it was like FERA. Every Indian who went abroad had violated FERA if you look closely enough.
Yes. Lavanti Beria, he was the head of the secret police of Stalin. He used to say, show me the person, I'll show you the crime.
Yeah.
Right? That was true for Indian business, because even in labor laws today, I would submit, we've got new labor codes on the table. You can't comply with 100% of India's labor laws without violating 10% of them. There are 22 definitions of workers, there are 17 definitions of wages. So if somebody wants to nail you on one of the definitions, you're complying with. So I think that the notion that we could have had a different trajectory is obviously true for all history in India. I think we have to look forward. The important part
of looking forward, I don't want to interrupt you, because one of the people we had on the program was Raghuram Rajan, and he said one of the things that concerned him was that he wanted more people to go from the agricultural sector to cities, to urbanization, to the manufacturing sector, and in fact that wasn't happening at all. Is that valid?
Well, 42% of people still work on farms.
Yeah.
That's
and that number is going to stay the same, he said, in the foreseeable future unless something dramatic happens.
I don't think so. I think that the farm to non-farm transition, the rural to urban transition, the informal to formal transition, the school to work transition has begun.
You think so? You're more optimistic?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think the next 25 years of India will be very different from the last 25 or the last 50.
Okay, that's the first hopeful thing you said. So tell me how it will be different.
Because of a bunch of luck. We have a China luck, we have digitization luck, we have servicization luck, and we now genuinely have a program for human capital. I think, Gandhiji had a wonderful speech in 1934 at Wardha, where he called it Nai Talim, and he talked about experiential learning. He argued against, in some sense, the 10 plus 2 plus 3 system, where he said asking children to choose your subjects in class 10 is like child marriage.
I didn't know it. So
yes, it's a wonderful way to think about today.
It's a great line.
And so, new world of work where employment has shifted from being a lifetime contract to a taxi cab relationship, in a new world where the economic gravity of the world is shifting to Asia. No economist would predict a poor country like India. In 2021, we exported more software than Saudi Arabia did oil. Right? It's a unique sort of accident, or you may say accomplishment.
But Saudi Arabia, the oil is the natural resource. In India, the people are the natural resource.
Well, but software is a really important question. See, I think that $250 billion of software exports, $50 billion of pharma exports, and $120 billion of remittances are all forms of human capital.
Yeah.
So when people say we've blown up our demographic dividend, I'm not sure that's true. Have we maximized our demographic dividend? Of course not, because we just neglected primary education. Yeah. There are three problems in human capital. There's a matching problem, which is connecting demand to supply. There's a mismatch problem, which is repairing supply for demand.
Right.
And there's a pipeline problem, which is preparing supply for demand. And I distinguish between repair and prepare based on the opening balance of the kid or the duration of the course. But I think we in some sense, the repair program is now getting much better. What have we learned in skills? There are 5 design principles that we have reflected on in the last 20 years. We've tried many things in skills, starting with the National Skill Mission, National Skill Development Corporation, Ministry of Skills, and there are 5 things we have to do. Learning while earning is very important because for a poor country like India, we may probably be the first country where employed learners will be more than full-time learners.
Okay.
We have to do that because otherwise we won't. So learning while earning was important. Learning by doing is very important. Soft skills are not taught, they are caught.
Yeah.
So the notion that the only classroom is that. So then we need multimodal classrooms. We need an on-job classroom, we need an on-campus classroom, we need an online classroom, and we need an on-site classroom. We need qualification modularity. A 3-month certificate has an opening balance for a 1-year diploma, has an opening balance for a 2-year advanced diploma, has an opening balance for a 3-year or a 4-year degree. And we need learning with signaling value. Michael Spence got his Nobel Prize for the signaling value. You went to Oxford or Cambridge?
Oxford.
Oxford. So Oxford is a better place to be at, and it's a good place to be at, but a better place to be from. Right? The fundamental value is being from Oxford, not at Oxford.
Well, I try and keep quiet.
From IIT, or from IIT, or from IIM, or any other place, because the signaling value that education gives you is really important. And traditionally, skills had no signaling value. Employers would say, I don't know whether the ITI exam was real. I don't know whether an electrician knows the difference. So I think the 5 design principles of learning by doing, learning while earning, learning with qualification modularity, learning with multiple classrooms, and learning with signaling value is finally getting embedded in our education system. For example, you've seen a huge, not a huge, but a substantial increase in degree apprenticeships.
Yes.
Right? They are 1/3 ITI, 1/3 employment exchange, and 1/3 college, which is really what the sweet spot is. You want the signaling value of degree, you want the skills of ITI, and you want the matching of the employment exchange with the employer.
Yeah.
So I think in the next 25 years, there was a bunch of luck, which I mentioned. I think there's a transformation of human capital going on because of NEP. The only thing I hope we do in NEP is bring its 15-year glide path down to 5 years. I think there's been enough debate on NEP, and we don't need a 15-year glide path. We should bring it down to 5 years. I think the GST combined with digitization because of the digital public infrastructure is increasing formalization.
Yes.
So formalization super cycle has begun. For at least 60 to 65 years after independence, entrepreneurs concluded that the costs of formality were higher than the benefits of formality.
Yeah.
Right? So they would create transmission losses between how the law was written, interpreted, practiced, and enforced.
Right.
What is development? Development is moving from deals to rules. In India, if somebody if you follow a rule, you feel like you missed a deal, right?
Yes.
You should have called somebody, why did I follow a rule, right? But that's very
You have to actually make excuses and say things like, at least I can sleep at night because I follow the rules. I mean, it should just be the normal thing to do.
So I think the human capital super cycle, the formalization super cycle, the urbanization super cycle is on. The question is, will it be good urbanization or bad urbanization? Do we define urbanization as shoving more people into Delhi, Bombay, or Bangalore? Or do we create 200 cities more with the 3 to 7 million, which seems to be the sweet spot? See, the more than 10 million city is a uniquely Asian innovation. In 1972, there were only 3 cities in the world with more than 10 million people: Mexico, New York, and Tokyo. Now there are 33 cities, of which 27 are in Asia.
Yeah.
I would submit more than 10 million people is just subs. It creates diseconomies of scale.
So 10 million is the sweet spot?
No, 3 to 8 million, 3 to 7 million is the sweet spot.
So anything more than 10 is a problem.
Yeah, 10, 15, 20, then you start getting to, in Bangalore, the average taxi now travels at 8 kilometers an hour.
Yeah.
Most people can walk that fast. so you really lost the upside of the internal combustion engine. So my sense is that urbanization super cycle has begun. Is it good or bad urbanization? For me, that really matters, because bad urbanization creates this massive wedge between real wages and nominal wages. wages.
Yeah.
Let me explain that. In a job fair in Gwalior, the kid told me, give me 5,000 rupees in Gwalior, 8,000 rupees in Gurgaon, 12,000 rupees in Delhi, and 20,000 rupees in Bombay. My bags are packed, tell me where you want me to go. I said, why do you need 4 times more money to go to Bombay? He said, जितने बच्चे बॉम्बे 10,000 में गए थे सब वापस आ गए, खाना रहना और ऑफिस जाना नहीं बनता है 10,000.
Which is true, no?
Yeah, so I told him, तुम तो थर्ड क्लास फेल है, मैं तुमको 20,000 क्यों दूंगा? He said, मैं ग्रेजुएट से खाना कम थोड़ी खाता हूँ सर. So he had a purchasing power parity model in his head. We hired him on the spot.
And it worked out?
Yes, it worked out because, I mean, again, pathology is at the level of the city. It's not at the level of the individual. True. But the problem is the jobs are being created in Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore. We should be creating jobs in Jalandhar, Jammu, Patna. So I hope that, 29 chief ministers matter more than one prime minister. We've known for a long time. Even the current PM said that when he was chief minister of Gujarat. But I think 100 mayors matter more than 29 chief ministers.
And that's one area we've just ignored, right?
Yes. And I think we can't do it any further. So if anybody is interested in jobs, they will be interested in urbanization. And if you're interested in urbanization, you will be interested in giving more funds, functions, and functionaries to cities. It's still debatable. For the first, Indira Gandhi, in I think 7 of her speeches, said strong states lead to a weak nation. Which meant that for the first 70 years, the central government spent more than 29 state governments. Now, 29 state governments spend more than the central government. But the city governments only spend 1%. See, the central government spends about 40 lakh crores, state governments spend 48 lakh crores, but 2.5 lakh municipalities and panchayats spend 3 lakh crores.
I didn't know. I didn't know there was that kind of
disparity. It's just 3.5 lakh crores is the total of 2.5 municipalities. So for a long time, you couldn't run India from Delhi, but Delhi was the obstruction to giving money to state capitals.
Yeah.
But now state capitals are becoming an obstruction to give money.
The other way around.
No, they've become the insurgents have become the incumbents. Now chief ministers don't want to give money to cities and don't want to have real mayors. So I think urbanization out of my
But sorry, I'm going to interrupt because there is a perception among middle class people that because most Indian politicians, at least till now, have emerged from villages, from rural areas, they have no particular sympathy for or love of cities. In Maharashtra, this has been the traditional complaint about Mumbai, that Maharashtra ministers don't really identify with Mumbai and don't care about it. Is there something to that?
I don't think so. I think that they recognize that 70% of the GDP of Karnataka is Bangalore.
Yeah.
But it's not 70% of the voters. So I think they're being pretty rational about their calculation. Yeah. And I think when you choose to be part of a union, which is why I have no patience for this North versus South argument that South does the taxes, but without the North, you wouldn't be defending yourself. I think when you join a union, some cross-subsidy across areas is obvious. If cross-subsidy becomes too much, it's a problem. So I think there will always be a rural-urban cross-subsidy. The jobs and the wealth and the income will be created in urban areas. But some people will choose to food security is important.
Yeah.
But we don't need 42% for food security, we need 5%. But even when we get to 5, we'll have to subsidize food a little bit between consumers and producers.
Which is okay, no? I mean, these are compromises you make.
So I don't think it's a lack of ambition on the part of politicians to neglect urban areas. I think it's the incentives they confront on where voters are.
Which is the electoral math. Listen, we're at the end of our time.
Yeah.
What you've said, I think you brilliantly analyzed what our problems are and you've traced the roots. You've talked about how we're going to be lucky in the next 25 years. So is it fair to say that you're optimistic about it?
Oh, absolutely. If we make 6 choices, if we accelerate NEP, if we revamp skills with degree apprenticeships, if we reduce the regulatory cholesterol, if we hand over money.
Regulatory cholesterol means the sort of blocks in the veins and
filings, the compliances, the filings, the criminal provisions for employers. Without employers, there are no employees. Yeah. So let's just not make life miserable for employers. And we continue the infrastructure build out. The role of the government is not to set things on fire. It is to create the conditions for spontaneous combustion. And I think the compounding of India over the last many years is now getting us to critical mass. You know, when I landed in August 1994 in the US, there was a front page article on Wall Street Journal which said that India is more interesting than important. I hope the journalist is eating the newspaper on which he wrote that, right? Because, I mean, the next 25 years are what's going to happen in India is not once in a decade or once in a millennium. It's once in the lifetime of a country. And there is a bunch of generational luck for the kids, you know. I can understand why 80% of the IIT Delhi class in 1972 left India. This year, 80% of the IIT Delhi class stayed back in India.
That one figure tells you everything, doesn't
That's
it?
the future.
Yeah. Manish, thank you so much. It's been such an interesting conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.